While I was in college, I got a job at a 24-hour fast food joint called the Grill Shack. The place was fairly popular with kids, and it could get pretty busy at weekends, but it wasn't such a bad place to work. I was always placed on the front as a waitress instead of in the back where the kitchens were, so I didn't have to deal with the grimy, overheated grills. I'd been there for almost 3 months when I got asked to do my first night shift. I would have turned it down since I had classes the next day, but they offered me double pay, and I was desperate for money, so I ended up accepting. Stupidly, I never thought to ask why the pay would be double just for working the night shift. I figured it was just because of the late hours, but given that it didn't seem like the kind of place that would be busy overnight, double did seem a bit excessive. I turned up just before 11 p.m. for my shift and was surprised to find the place empty, since I was used to seeing it so packed during the day. I was on shift with another coworker, Hannah, who I had only met a couple times before and didn't know too well. She was in the kitchens at the back when I went through to put my stuff away. "Hey," I said, trying to strike up a conversation. She shot me a brief nod before going back to grilling burgers, so I shrugged it off and went to the staff room. After tying my hair back and putting on my apron, I headed out the front to keep watch over the restaurant. About an hour later, Hannah came out of the kitchens, her jacket slung over her elbow. "I'm off." I stared at her. "What, already?" She looked at me oddly. "Yeah, I've grilled enough patties to keep you going. You just gotta warm them up when someone comes in. Maybe add a couple extra toppings." "I'm here on my own?" I asked, my voice tentative. Hannah nodded slowly. "I thought you were told all this." I shook my head. "Nobody told me anything. Just to get here at 11 p.m. Hannah bit her lip, a strange expression on her face that I couldn't quite discern. "You'll be fine," she finally said, looking away from me. "Just make sure you stay out front. And if you hear anything at the drive-thru, ignore it." Before I could ask what she meant, she strode through the front doors, leaving them swinging shut in her wake. I stared after her, an unsettling feeling in my gut. What did she mean if I heard anything at the drive-thru? It was always closed after 10 p.m., so I hadn't expected any customers there anyway. I shrugged off her warning, reminding myself I was getting paid double. Admittedly, I hadn't expected to be left here on my own the whole night, but I would get through it. It didn't seem like the place would get that busy anyway. The clock ticked noiselessly on the wall as the night wore on. At just past 1:30, a couple of truckers came in, so I heated up the burgers that Hannah had prepared and kept an eye on them through the window. It was tough doing everything myself, but the guys were patient and polite enough, so I didn't mind. I waved them off a short while later and settled back into the eerie stillness of the restaurant at 2 a.m. Outside, it was pitch dark. I could barely see anything through the windows, and I could hear nothing but the wind scratching through the trees. I almost jumped when my phone buzzed from my apron pocket, and I pulled it out. "Mark's coming in to help at 4 a.m. Until then, remember what I said. Hannah." I wasn't sure how Hannah had managed to get my number, but I was grateful for the reassurance. Only 2 more hours and I wouldn't be on my own anymore. Still, I found it weird that she had to remind me of her words. If you hear anything at the drive-thru, ignore it. What exactly had she meant by that? I decided not to think too much about it and went to the storeroom to grab a mop. I figured I might as well make myself useful, and it would make the time go quicker until the next customer arrived. I was in the midst of mopping up grime and grease from the linoleum at the front of the restaurant when the air suddenly went very cold. Almost like the doors were open, letting in the night chill. But when I checked, they were closed. I shivered, wearing only a short-sleeved shirt under my apron, goosebumps appearing along my arms and neck. Had the heating shut off or something? Frowning, I leaned the mop against the wall and headed back towards the kitchen. I was about to check the thermostat when I heard it. The soft crackle of static coming from the drive-thru speakers. My heart instantly dropped to my stomach as Hannah's warning echoed through my head. If you hear anything at the drive-thru. Was there a fault with the speakers or something? I shook my head. Just ignore it, like Hannah said. Just ignore it. The static grew louder, filling the restaurant's kitchen, and I turned around to look at the drive-through windows on the other side of the room. It was too dark to properly see anything out there, but just for a second, I thought I glimpsed a shadow standing by the window. When I looked again, it was gone, and I told myself I had simply imagined it. All at once, the static stopped, and the kitchen went quiet again. I breathed a sigh of relief. Just a malfunction after all. The second the thought crossed my mind, the speakers crackled again, and a voice came through. It was nothing but a whisper, barely audible over the grainy, muffled audio, but it sounded male. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared at the windows again. Was something out there? Is anyone there? The voice whispered, speaking in soft, strangled bursts. Is anyone there? I stood frozen in place, hardly knowing what to do. Hannah had told me to ignore it, but was this what she meant? Maybe it was just someone messing around, playing a prank. But something about the voice, the way it was speaking, gave me the chills. My breath quickened as I stood there, the eerie voice repeating its haunting question, each word more desperate than the last. My trembling hands clenched the edge of the counter, and I strained to see through the inky blackness outside. The drive-through windows remained empty, devoid of any signs of life. Ignoring the voice was becoming increasingly difficult. My phone vibrated in my pocket, startling me once again. Another message from Hannah. Don't listen to it. Don't answer. It's not real. I bit my lip, torn between fear and curiosity. If it wasn't real, why was my heart racing so violently? Why did my skin crawl as if 1,000 unseen eyes were fixed upon me? The voice outside grew more desperate, its whisper clawing at my sanity. Please, I need help. Please, is anyone there? It sounded like the voice of a man in agony, like a trapped soul pleading for salvation. As much as I wanted to heed Hannah's warning and maintain my silence, I couldn't resist the overwhelming dread pulling me toward the speaker. With trembling fingers, I reached for the intercom button, ready to shatter the silence. But then, a vision flashed before my eyes. It was Hannah's face, twisted in terror, her lips forming silent words. An indescribable horror overtook her features, and her eyes were wide with panic. That image was enough to stay my hand, to remind me that something was deeply wrong about all of this. The voice outside became frantic, its words devolving into incoherent pleas, as if it sensed my hesitation. Please, 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 help me! I backed away from the intercom, feeling the icy grip of fear tighten around my chest. The voice continued to call out into the void, its words more desperate, more unsettling. It grew louder, more insistent, as if it could feel my resistance. Just as I was about to surrender to the temptation, the restaurant's front door swung open, and a burst of frigid air rushed in. Mark, as Hannah had mentioned in her message, had arrived early. He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. Then, at the drive-through speaker. Listen, he whispered. Don't ever answer it. It's not what it seems. I nodded, grateful for the reinforcement, but the unsettling presence outside lingered, the voice growing angrier and more deranged. The night had become a canvas of horror, and I knew that whatever was out there was far from human.
I haven't seen Maddie since that sleepover when we were 13. The paramedics, police, and our parents separated us, and once things cooled down, I chose to stay away from her. That night felt like an eternity. I still remember the sirens blaring as we held each other in the dark and damp lakeshore, waiting for anyone to find us, two helpless deers in headlights. I remember shivering, chattering my teeth so hard I felt like I'd bitten off my tongue. Pajamas drenched head to toe, I stared into Maddie's sunken eyes. They were bloodshot and unforgiving, with the embossed little veins creeping in her eyeballs. She'd been scared to death, I thought then. And for all I've known since, she might as well have been. When we went to bed that night, Maddie and I were safely tucked in together, inseparable as we had been since grade school, a friends forever type of bond. But something bad happened that night. Other than my parents arguing the night away, something else happened that I couldn't recall, no matter how hard I tried. I do know one thing, a gut feeling I couldn't shake off, that from then on, I had to stay away from Maddie. Being a 13-year-old, I immediately followed my impulses and refused to see her, refused to go to school with her, refused to talk to her. Everyone thought that this was some sort of trauma response. My parents allowed me to switch schools, and they never asked me anything about Maddie ever again. I made new friends and moved on, and eventually everyone moved on. Everyone forgot all about the night we had a sleepover and ended up at Silver Lake the following morning. The strange tragedy became nothing more than a distant memory. That is, until I saw her again. Across the bonfire, Maddie stood in front of me. An unwelcome, yet anticipated specter that night at the town's get-together, the Summer Bonfire by Silver Woods. It had been 4 years since I'd seen her. Puberty certainly did a number on her, yet I still would have recognized her anywhere. Those bloodshot eyes, forever etched in my head. "Maddie!" I called out, albeit a bit hesitantly. But she was laser-focused on arguing with a guy in front of her. He looked like the football team type. They had to be together. I watched the fight escalate, and flinched when he raised his hand as if he was going to hit her. Maddie stood up to him, though. She caught his hand by the wrist and challenged him to hit her. This took me by surprise. Maddie was always the braver one between the two of us, but I wouldn't have expected her to do something like stand up to a guy twice her size with ease. The guy stared daggers at first, but then chose to storm off after a few seconds. A wise decision given how she looked like she was ready to roundhouse kick him into the bonfire. Confident that she'd won, Maddie sat down and made herself comfortable. She watched the flames, and they danced in her eyes. And then suddenly, she was watching me. It took me a few seconds to register this. Across the bonfire, Maddie was staring right at me. Hi? I managed to let out. She raised an eyebrow and immediately made her way over. "Lana?" She asked as if she'd seen a ghost. That was mutual. Uh-huh, I managed to utter before she rushed over to give me a bear hug. I melted into her arms immediately. I missed her. I had to stay away from her for some reason, but at the end of the day, she was still my best friend. The only person who knew how to help me get out of my head back then. And I'm clinging to the hope that maybe she could do that to me now. We ended up walking through Silver Woods, sharing stories from the past 4 years. She talked all about that annoying guy on the football team she was dating and how they were probably done for good. I talked about my parents and how the family dog passed away 2 weeks ago, and we cried together. Somehow, unconsciously, finding our way back to Silver Lake. The water lapped at our feet, and I saw how distressed Maddie looked. "What happened that night?" I asked her, barely a whisper. "You already know," she replied, all innocent, as she stepped further into the water. "No, Maddie, I don't know. I don't remember anything about the sleepover. Nothing at all. Nothing except the fact that I should be scared of you." "Well, Lana," she said, turning around, her voice different, deeper. "You were sleeping, And I was sleeping too. That's what you remember, right? But what else do you remember about me? You've been my best friend for a while now. What else do you know about me? I know we met at elementary school. And what else? You should know more than that, she asked, stepping further into the lake, the water by her waist. I stuttered because I didn't know. I knew what emotion she made me feel, but nothing else about her. She was right. Who were her parents? Where did she live? She was swimming in the lake now. Because I'm not real, Lana. What? I said, trying to make sense of what she'd said as I waded my way over to her. I reached her in the middle of the lake and looked right into those beautiful, bloodshot eyes of her, trying my best to keep myself afloat. I was never a good swimmer. I'm Death, Lana. You turned to me when you were 13, and you're turning to me again now. Such a sad child. You should really learn how to not let other people's problems define you. Well, maybe in your next life. That's it. That's the answer I've been looking for. I guess everyone experienced death differently, and she was right. I saw my parents fight that night and decided to climb out the window, walking all the way to the lake to look for some peace and quiet, as I've done now. It wasn't Maddie that fought her boyfriend. I did. I fought with my boyfriend, and I walked all by myself to Silver Lake to drown again. But Maddie, she was death. She's right. I struggled to stay afloat, my mind reeling from Maddie's shocking revelation. As I floundered in the water, gasping for breath, I realized I had a choice to make. I couldn't let death claim me. Not again. Not this early in my life. I had already cheated Maddie once. I could do it again. With heavy arms and weak legs, I swam back to the shore. I could see Maddie watching me from the water. The flames in her eyes seemed to dance with anticipation. You won't take me, Maddie. Not until it's time. Debbie. Of course she wasn't going to let me quit in peace. She made my year working at the fast food joint become a total nightmare with her endless nagging and complaining. Why wouldn't she turn my 2 weeks' notice into the most insufferable series of tasks imaginable? That was on me for trying to do things by the book. That and the fear that my streaming career would totally bust and I'd be forced to go back to working minimum wage. Even though my views had skyrocketed after my latest Zelda gameplays, and so did my number of viewers, I was making just a little more than my average paycheck at work. Still, it was infinitely better to stay at home and stream than going to work every day. I couldn't stand that greasy and sticky kitchen anymore. And not seeing Debbie ever again was the icing on the cake. Anyway, back to real life. The senseless petty job started on Wednesday, a day after I'd given her the notice, with cleaning the goddamn ice cream machine. That thing hadn't been cleaned in months, mind you, and was an eye-opener that will probably keep me away from ice cream for at least a couple of months. Followed by cleaning up the lobby and the toilets after a day filled with kids' birthday parties, doing the whole inventory by myself 1 week before it was needed, and, worst of all, being placed for my last shift at the 24-hour store near Mainland with creepy Paul as my shift partner. That dude managed to creep everyone out, even other male workers. The rain outside was heavy to the point that we could barely see anything aside from some random shapes and lights going up and down the streets. At least the bad weather had pushed most customers away, and I spent a good chunk of time planning content for my channel. Around 2 a.m., the drive-thru microphone made a loud static-like noise, scaring both me and Paul. When I put on my headset to talk to the customer, all I heard were the loud thuds of rain hitting the street. but the microphone wouldn't turn on by itself, so someone had to be there. Hello? What can I get you? Hi, sorry, I'm here. Could I have a Mighty Muffin? 6 hash browns. Sorry, that won't be possible. Those items are from our breakfast menu, and that won't be available until 5 a.m. Now it's 2 a.m., so... When she said nothing in return, I called for her again. Oh, I'm still here. In that case, I'll want 2 bacon double cheeseburgers and a box of chicken nuggets. Everything to go. I then told her the price, and that she could wait at the window, and I would meet her there once the order was ready. Luckily, I didn't have to repeat everything to creepy Paul since he was nearby when I took the order, and he started to cook the burgers and the bacon as I went to fry the chicken nuggets. Overall, it took less than 10 minutes to make everything. Paul was a major creep, but he was also super fast in making the orders. No surprises there. I'd heard from one of our coworkers that he'd been on the grill for about 5 years. Apparently, he wasn't good at dealing with customers. No surprises there. So management always placed him on kitchen duty or cleaning duty. Basically anywhere people wouldn't see him. We packed everything, and I went to the delivery window and waited for them. The car approached very slowly, almost like it was purposely trying to stall. When the driver's side window opened, I was greeted by a tall man driving the car. So tall that his head was pretty much touching the ceiling of the car. And that made me momentarily confused since I was certain that a woman had made the order. Something shifted in the passenger seat, and I could then see a woman sitting beside him. She stretched over the driver until she was leaning on his window and handed me the money. Isn't it scary to stay all night alone in the store? It would be if I was alone, but I have a coworker with me. A male coworker? She asked. Although she was probably trying to make conversation, something about it felt off. Really off. Maybe the fact that throughout that whole interaction, the driver didn't say a single word. Just stared at me the whole time. Maybe he was one of those jealous weirdos who would try to jump at any man who spoke to their girlfriend just for the sake of picking a fight. Well, whatever that was, I didn't want to be a part of it. Management didn't usually let women work alone at the 24-hour locations. For obvious reasons, of course. Lots of creeps out there. Paul included, I thought. I gave her the food. She told me to keep the change, and that was that. Or at least, I thought so. Not even 15 minutes later, I saw her walking through the door and into the lobby, soaking wet. I asked her if everything was all right, and she proceeded to tell me how angry she was because we had supposedly given her an order with missing items. Her behavior was completely different from before, almost like they were 2 different people who happened to look exactly the same. And what items were missing? A single chicken nugget. I was in no mood to argue, so I simply apologized, and I offered a complimentary chocolate chip cookie to compensate for her troubles. She said she wasn't interested in my apologies and that I was going to regret messing with her. Both Paul and I just stared at her in confusion. Who in their right mind would get that angry over a singular chicken nugget? Before either of us could answer her, the door opened again, and in walked the man who was in the car with her, the driver. He was carrying a large backpack and wearing some sort of protective helmet with a small camera attached to the front. I knew then that something bad was going to happen. My mind immediately went to the window as an escape plan. And apparently so did Paul's, because next thing I knew, the woman was pointing a gun at him, barking orders to stay absolutely still, or else. We watched in horror as the man took large sets of chains from his backpack and sealed the main entrance. I saw him doing the same to the delivery window, and I assumed also the back door since he came back to the lobby empty-handed. The 4 of us were locked inside the store. The last thing he took out from the backpack was an identical helmet to his, which the woman was quick to place on her head. She handed him the gun that he placed inside the backpack and took from it 4 large knives instead. Paul and I stared at each other again, both of us completely terrified and in shock. Like speaking to an audience, the woman then laid out the rules of the so-called game. Rule number 1, no firearms, close contact weapons only. Rule number 2, at the start of the game, each player can have only 1 weapon. Weapons can be stolen from other players, though. Rule number 3, at the start of the game, each team must have the same number of players. Rule number 4, players can switch sides if and when they want, but they must be accepted by the members of the other team. And finally, rule number 5, stream everything. Never stop recording. The 4 of us were locked inside the store, and we were about to play some sick game of survival. The driver tossed 2 of the knives on the floor near us and told us to get them. I refused, but Paul didn't. After I remembered the rule about switching places, I grabbed the other knife. If I was about to fight Paul, too, I needed all the help I could get. The woman then had the balls to thank her damn sponsors before she gave the official go-ahead to start the game. At first, no one made a move. We just stared at one another in complete silence. The driver showed the woman something on his phone, and she laughed. It looks like the audience decided that you guys should make the first move. I noticed that the woman was wearing the keys to the exits around her neck. After about 10 minutes, and no move from either me or Paul, I could tell that they were getting impatient. Especially her. And then a series of pings on the driver's phone, to which the woman answered with a broad smile. The guy took 2 Molotov cocktails from the backpack, lit them up, and threw them over us and into the kitchen area. Her voice was dripping with mockery when she said, "Either you fight, or we all die in here. Dealer's choice." There was no way around it. I had to fight those crazy people if I wanted a shot at getting out alive. I took a deep breath, and I ran towards her first, full force, thinking it was my best shot since she was much smaller than I was. The impact was so strong that we both lost our balance, having to use one another for support to remain upright. That gave me the chance to pin her arms above her head as I prepared myself for the act of stabbing someone, something I had never done before and was hoping I would never have to. But I misjudged her abilities, or at least how scrappy she was, because she managed to get me right in the stomach with her kneecap. Ugh! Fuck, that hurt. It didn't take long until she was flipping me over, using my own weight as leverage against me. My back hit the floor with a muffled thud that took my breath away. She didn't waste any time, and sank the knife right on my left shoulder, and then dragged it down, slicing the skin. The sharp pain made my eyes sting, and then water, and I could feel the warm blood pooling on my collarbones. Standing on top of me, she grabbed my own knife, a much thinner and longer blade than hers, and randomly stabbed across my chest with a shallow jab. She was saying something I couldn't understand as I watched her lift her own knife high above her head, prepared to take me out. Creepy Paul came to the rescue like a knight and lunged against the woman. Soon after, I saw Paul and her in a similar position, both struggling for dominance over the other. Similarly to me, he was also bleeding. A lot. Didn't seem like he would last much longer. Between that, the smoke filling our lungs, and the fire rapidly taking over the place, none of us would survive much longer. I looked around, and I found the driver lying motionless on the floor, with a long, serrated bread knife sticking out from his stomach. That butthole got what he deserved. And next to him, the backpack, where the gun was. I crawled towards it, leaving a trail of fresh blood behind me. I managed to get the gun out and then screamed Paul's name, sliding the gun on the floor towards him. I assumed he must have grabbed it because I heard a loud shot, and then nothing. Silence. And then the sound of the flames getting stronger and stronger around us. Being carried out, half dead from a fire by creepy Paul was definitely not how I imagined my last shift to end. When I opened my eyes again, we were further out, and he was talking to the police on the driver's phone. The driver's phone! A sudden curiosity took over me, and I extended my hand, motioning for him to give me the phone. He did. I was confused once I realized it was locked, but Paul handed me the guy's severed thumb to unlock it. So, how much do you think they were making with all this? Well, only one way to find out, Paul said, and pointed towards the driver's bag. I started snooping around his laptop. The stream donations alone were enough to cover 7 months' worth of our paycheck combined. And his bank statements? Well, let's just say that they were running a very lucrative operation. Exhausted and borderline delirious from blood loss, a thought occurred to me. Maybe I had just found a foolproof way of never returning to minimum wage jobs ever again. And I knew just the person to partner up with.
I live in Utah, so most of the families in my neighborhood are Mormon. They're all really friendly, but I'm not part of the church, so I always feel like an outsider. I drink and have tattoos, and even though people are nice to my face, I can tell that most of my neighbors don't really accept me. I don't want to move though, because I have a pretty good job, and it's a beautiful area. I just wish it were easier to make friends. The couple who live next door were probably the most outwardly mean to me, Seth and Brittany. They were both tall, blonde, and very good looking. Aside from me, they were the only other people in our neighborhood who didn't have any kids. When I first moved in, I figured we'd get along well. Brittany even came over and dropped off a housewarming meatloaf. But almost instantly, I knew they didn't like me. Brittany took one look at the tattoos on my arms and shielded her eyes, as if she'd just seen me naked. I assumed she rushed back to her house and told Seth that the Antichrist had moved in next door, because that evening, I got an email from my new homeowners association listing off all the problems with my house. I knew that Brittany and Seth were the ones who complained about me, and it wasn't even my fault. I just moved in. All the problems with the house existed before I got there. That didn't matter though. Thanks to them, I had to spend hundreds of dollars fixing up my shutters and porch, even though no one had any problems with the house when the previous owner was there. A few weeks later, Seth invited me to their house for a barbecue, and I figured it was their attempt to bury the hatchet. I told him I'd come. It was in the middle of July, so it was very hot. But when I got there, Seth handed me a long sleeve sweater to wear so that no one would have to see my tattoos. I told him point blank that I wasn't going to wear it, and he told me to leave. After that, I heard from our other neighbors that Seth had lied about what happened and told everyone that I'd show up drunk to his house and he had to kick me out before anyone else saw. I tried to let everyone know what really happened, but I was still the outsider. Everyone believed Seth over me. After that, I tried to avoid them. They kept complaining to the homeowners association about me, including all the times I supposedly walked around naked in my own home with all the windows open. That was a lie, of course, but people still didn't believe me. I hated them, I honestly did. And the worst part was that there was nothing I could do about it until last month when my brother Andrew came for a visit. Andrew is a few years younger than me, and he's always been kind of the wild child in our family. He arrived at my house right when Seth and Brittany were leaving theirs. He took one look at them and his face dropped. It was like he saw a ghost or something. I pulled him inside, and then he instantly burst out laughing. He asked me if those were the neighbors that I always complained about, and I said that they were. They were the perfect golden couple that saw me as the biggest screw-up in the world. Just wait till you see this, he said. He pulled his laptop out of his backpack and connected to my Wi-Fi. Then, he went to his OnlyFans account. I told him that I didn't want to see any of the adult videos that he watched, but that didn't stop him. He clicked on one of the accounts that he followed, and there on his screen, I saw Seth and Brittany dressed up like superheroes. What the hell? I asked. Do they post adult videos online? Nope, he said. That's just it. They don't do anything. That's why I subscribed to their account, because they're so cringe. Here, watch this. He clicked on one of their videos, and I saw Seth and Brittany in their superhero costumes tap dancing to country music. Then he clicked on another video, and I saw them sword fighting with their stuffed animals. The next video showed them talking to the camera about the best way to wash laundry, and the next one was them rubbing each other's feet. Andrew was right. This was the cringiest thing I'd ever seen. It wasn't sexy. It wasn't funny. There was absolutely no reason why they were wearing superhero costumes at all. It was just awful. And they had hundreds of subscribers. I knew I could use this to my advantage, but I also knew that I couldn't just share their OnlyFans link to our other neighbors. No one would click on it. I had to do something more drastic. So that night, I invited Seth and Brittany over to my house for dinner. They didn't want to come, but they were too outwardly polite to say no. As the three of us sat down to eat and Brittany kept complaining about how terrible my food was, Andrew snuck over to their house. Their door was unlocked because no one locks their doors in our neighborhood. He snuck into their bedroom where they filmed most of their videos and started messing with their camera. My brother is kind of an idiot, but he's amazing with technology. He works with audio-visual equipment for his job, so he had all the equipment he needed. It only took him 10 minutes, and then he came back and joined us for the rest of our dinner. The next day, I invited all our neighbors over for a big outdoor barbecue. I scheduled it for 5 o'clock because I knew that was when Seth and Brittany went live for their Friday stream. Because of that, they were the only people in our neighborhood who didn't show up. Everyone else was there. My brother set up a giant projector in my backyard, and once everyone arrived, he turned it on. Instead of streaming directly to OnlyFans, Seth and Brittany's video was projected directly onto my screen. Everyone could see them dressed up in their costumes and rubbing each other's feet. I didn't say anything. I just let the video speak for itself. The entire neighborhood freaked out, but they were all too polite to leave. So we had our barbecue and everyone awkwardly tried to ignore the video that was playing in the background. I don't know who went over to their house first, but someone must have told them about what happened, because that night, Seth came knocking on my door demanding to know what I'd done. All I said was that I found them online and that I was their biggest fan. They moved away a week later. I still haven't made friends with a lot of the other neighbors. They all think I went too far, but that's okay. I can live with that.
I never got along with my sister-in-law, Tabitha. She was my husband Derek's stepsister, so she wasn't even part of the family. But she'd always show up to events and treat me like garbage. I always complained to Derek about her, but he never did anything. He and Tabitha had a really weird, close bond. Over summer, Derek and I had a barbecue at our house, and of course, Tabitha showed up. Honestly, she looked amazing. She announced to everyone that she had just gotten a facelift. When I was alone in the kitchen, Tabitha came up to me and handed me a card to her plastic surgeon. She explained that her doctor was the best in town, and he worked really cheap. She said that the doctor had a 2-for-1 special, so she said that if I was interested, I could get a nose job for free. I can't tell you how offended I was. I knew that my nose was big, but I'd never had anyone talk to me so bluntly about it. I told her I wasn't interested, but she made me keep the card. After the barbecue ended, Derek asked me why I was in such a bad mood. I told him what his stepsister said to me, and of course he defended her. He said she was just trying to help. Even worse, he encouraged me to go through with the operation. He told me that I was beautiful just the way I was, but that I'd be a lot happier with a nose job. Things escalated into an argument, but eventually I gave in. All I wanted was to make Derek happy, and it seemed like he really wanted me to see the doctor. I called the number on the card and scheduled a consultation the next day. I wasn't sure if I would go through with it, but if the surgery was free, I could at least go down there and get some information. The next day, I drove to the doctor's office. It was in a really sketchy part of town. There was no sign out front, and the whole building looked like an old warehouse. I called Derek and told him I was having second thoughts, but he just told me to go in and have a look. That was it. So I walked inside and found a dirty waiting room. All the chairs were old and rusted. No one else was there except for an angry-looking nurse behind the counter. I was about to turn around and leave when the nurse called out, "Hello, ma'am. Did Tabitha send you?" I nodded. Instantly, the nurse walked towards me and grabbed my arm. She guided me down the hallway into a small room. Before I could say anything, she rushed out of the room and closed the door behind her. I looked around, and the place didn't look sterile at all. There was a table with old surgical tools in the corner, and the faucet was dripping water. I had a really bad feeling about this. I walked toward the door, ready to leave, but then the doctor entered. I couldn't see his face behind the surgical mask, but he looked very old. I started to tell him that I'd changed my mind, but he interrupted me. "Tabitha sent you, right?" he asked. "Yeah?" He walked towards me and gently led me to the operating bed. "Sit right here, and I'll give you an anesthetic." This didn't make any sense. If I was here for a nose job, wouldn't he want to talk about it first? I assume I'd pick noses out of a catalog or something. I tried to stand up and walk towards the door, but he grabbed me and pulled me back down. "We haven't even started yet," he said. Now I knew for sure something was wrong. Tabitha had set me up. This wasn't a real doctor's office. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew I had to leave. The doctor pulled out a syringe and lowered it toward my arm. I frantically reached towards the table and grabbed one of the scalpels. I smacked the syringe out of his hand and then pushed the scalpel against his neck. "Tell me what's going on," I shouted. He stepped back and explained that he performed operations on a barter system. Tabitha got her facelift in exchange for some extra organs. She'd chosen me to donate them. I was horrified. I knew Tabitha hated me, but I never thought she'd do anything like this. The doctor drove the syringe on the ground, but as he was crouching down, I jumped off the bed and ran past him. I raced down the hallway while he shouted at me to stop. When I got to the waiting room, I saw the nurse standing guard at the entrance. She held up a syringe. "Looks like we have another runner." If I tried to run past her, she'd probably inject me. So I picked up one of the metal chairs and threw it at her. She ducked out of the way, and the chair banged up against the front door. Using that as a distraction, I shoved past her and raced out. Then I got in my car and sped off. As I was driving back home, I called 911. I tried to explain what happened, but the cops couldn't believe me. I guess I sounded really frantic, but he told me not to make prank calls and then hung up. My only other plan was to go back home and tell Derek. He'd know what to do. But when I pulled into our driveway, I saw Tabitha's car parked outside. I couldn't let her see me. I parked far away from the house and snuck through the yard. Then I looked through the window and saw Tabitha and my husband drinking wine together. They were sitting awfully close. That's when I realized that Derek was in on it too. He knew that his stepsister was planning to get me killed. I watched in horror as Derek slowly kissed Tabitha. It made me want to throw up. I couldn't go home, and I couldn't go to the police. So I drove all the way across town to stay with an old friend from high school. I knew that no one would find me there. I decided to stay low for a bit. That would give me time to think about my next steps. Almost immediately, my husband tried to call, but I didn't answer. Tabitha called me too. Then I got a call from an unlisted number. I answered it and heard that doctor's voice on the other end. He told me to come back and give up my kidney. He promised that I'd survive with just one. I refused, of course. There was no way I was going back there. Then the doctor started screaming at me. He said that Tabitha had gotten a very expensive surgery and he needed a payment. "I'm sorry," I said, "but if you still need someone's organs, I think my husband is available." Then I hung up. The next day, I calmed down enough to go to the police. I told them everything, and it seemed like they believed me. They sent some officers to the address I gave them, but when they got there, the building was empty. There was no sign of any doctor's office. Derek kept calling me for the next few days, but then all at once, he stopped. About a week later, I saw on the news that the police had found a dead body in the river. It was Tabitha. Her face had been surgically removed. I guess they never got their payments, so they took back their operation. I don't know what happened to my husband, though. No one has seen him in months.
I never wanted any of this to happen. I just wanted a normal break with my best friends. I don't know what went wrong. First day of break from my freshman year of college at Brown University. I wish I could have stayed at school, but my mom had been up my ass trying to get me to come home. I'd avoided it since moving to Rhode Island. I didn't want to come back home to Iowa to my screaming siblings and my pestering mother. As far as my father was concerned, I had not met or heard about him since he left us all over 10 years ago. He was a good-for-nothing fella. My mother had to do all the heavy lifting to provide for us. To lessen the blow, I'd asked my best friends Luke and Blair to tag along. They were planning on staying at school since they both live out of the country, and they didn't want to take hours-long flights to get back home. Luke, Blair, and I met while all cliff jumping in Rhode Island. We had been inseparable since. We did things like that a lot. Cliff diving, jumping, skydiving, etc. We do it all, and it solidified our strength and friendship. When I asked them if they'd go on this crazy adventure with me, Blair was so excited to meet my family, while Luke asked if I had a hot sister. That's just the way we were. Blair and Luke were my family. So we set off to get from Rhode Island to Iowa, stopping along the way by Blair's request to see the sights and take pictures at every state sign. We'd have to use the bathroom like normal people, so we'd stop at the not-so-sketchy gas stations. Everything was fine until, in Pennsylvania, there was an odd occurrence. My truck was older, so it has a little trouble every so often. Nothing too crazy, but sometimes it doesn't start after it gets a little hot. It hasn't been an issue, and I don't see it becoming a real one. A little dark green Buick pulled up beside my truck, and the man inside asked if we had extra money for them to get gas. We were broke college students, so we said no. He gave Blair an alarming look before pulling away. "What was that?" said Luke. Blair quickly responded, "It was probably nothing. Let's just leave." So we left. Hours had passed, and we were about to cross the border between Ohio and Indiana when Blair said aloud, "I have to pee." "There's not a gas station for miles," I said, looking at my GPS. "I literally do not care. I'll pee on a bush." A few seconds later, I saw an outhouse-looking building and pulled up next to it. Blair ran out of the car and into the door before I could even say anything. "Odd place for a bathroom, don't you think?" Luke questioned. "Of course I do. She just needs to pee, then we will leave. We don't have much more driving to do," I said. Just then, a dark green Buick pulled up to the building. The man from Pennsylvania got out of the car. Luke and I looked at each other. Luke ran to the door that Blair went inside and yelled for her to hurry up. I watched the man. He looked at Luke, then turned his attention toward me. He had some sort of mask on. He cocked his head as if he was curious. He reached into his pocket. I looked at his hands just in time for him to pull out a knife from his pants. I was in shock. Luke and Blair were both watching now. All of us, frozen in front of this man. The man laughed at me and sliced my arm. It hurt like hell. Blood began to stream down my arm. Blair screamed while Luke ran towards the man. I yelled for Blair to get into the car. Luke had the man in front of him and punched him. The man fell to the ground, and Luke ushered me to get into the car. I turned the key in the ignition. Nothing happened. "Come on, not now, please," I begged. "He's getting up. Sam, you better start this car," Blair cried. I tried again. Nothing. Again. Nothing. I hit the steering wheel over and over. Started. Restarted. Nothing. 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 The man was standing now. He was walking towards the car. I did it once more. Engine started. A sigh of relief washed over all of us. I hit the gas pedal. Hard. Not even looking behind me. Got back on the road. "Dude, look at your arm." Luke sounded emotional. I looked down at my blood-stained sleeve. "I'll be okay. Let's just put some distance between us and that psycho. How did he even find us? We saw him 2 states over. Do you think he's stalking us?" I tried to rationalize the last 10 minutes in my brain. It seemed so weird and strange to me. Why did this happen? About 10 minutes up the road, my check engine light pops up. "Oh no." Blair sounded more scared than annoyed. "It'll be fine. There's no way the guy could have caught up to us." I tried to sound more assured than I feel. Up ahead, I saw a McDonald's. Never in my life had I seen anything so beautiful, but the lights weren't on. I decided to pull over to check my engine light out. I told everyone to stay in the car just in case anything happened. I got outside my car and went to the hood, pulled it up. Steam came out of it. I don't know much about cars, but I know that's a bad sign. I pulled out my phone. No signal. I went back inside the car. I asked Luke and Blair if they had a signal. Nope. So the car was toast. Phones were toast. Also, we were hungry, so we trekked into McDonald's. Right off the bat, we were scared. We quickly realized this was an abandoned location. We looked around. This place was in bad shape. Tables flipped over. The windows had some sort of muddy brown sludge on them. The floor was stained, chairs broken. It smelt of death. Immediately, Blair began to look for a first aid kit, even though I assured her that I'd be fine. She found one back in the kitchen. We opened it. It looked sterile enough. While Blair helped me, Luke was exploring. As she was finishing up, Luke painfully yelled from the front of the building. We ran out there, and backlit by car headlights, we saw the man holding Luke up with a knife stuck in from the back. Blair screamed. I took her hand and ran to the back. The man laughed. His laugh radiated throughout the restaurant. I took Blair and we hid under something in the kitchen. Blair was sobbing now, and I'll admit, I wasn't doing too well either. I motioned for Blair to cover her mouth to muffle her sound. She got the message, then suddenly, a sharp ping bellowed through the kitchen. A knife on metal. He was here. Blair's breath hitched. I closed my eyes. I just wanted to go home. I needed to see my family. I don't know why this man was after us. I could hear his steps getting closer. I was breathing heavily. Blair, completely shocked and traumatized, jumped from her hiding spot and yelled, "He's right here!" I looked at her. I was so confused. She wiped her tears away and just stared. I turned to see her pointing at the man with the knife. My heart sank, thinking that he had found our hiding spot. But then, to my astonishment, I noticed something peculiar about the scene before us. The man with the knife was no longer menacingly advancing towards us. Instead, he stood frozen in place, his eyes wide with fear, and he was staring not at us, but at something behind Blair. Confused and terrified, I followed his gaze, and that's when I saw it. A shadowy figure emerging from the darkness of the abandoned McDonald's. A figure that looked eerily familiar. As I stepped closer to the dim light, I gasped in disbelief. It was my father. He had aged since I last saw him, his face weathered and lined with the passage of time. He looked nothing like the lazy, disinterested man who had haunted my childhood. There was determination and resolve in his eyes, a stark contrast to the lifeless expression I remembered. My father moved swiftly, disarming the man who had been threatening us. The knife clattered to the floor, and the assailant stumbled backward in shock and fear. My father, without saying a word, grabbed the man's arm and wrestled him to the ground, pinning him. Blair and I watched in astonishment as my father held the intruder down, his voice low and commanding as he spoke into the man's ear. Whatever he said made the intruder tremble with fear. When it was over, my father released the man, who scrambled to his feet and fled from the restaurant, disappearing into the night. I couldn't comprehend what had just happened. My father, the man I had grown to despise, had just saved our lives. He turned to look at me. There was a hint of remorse in his eyes. Without a word, he walked away into the darkness. Blair and I were left stunned in silence. As we made our way back to the car, my mind raced with questions. What had changed in my father? Why had he come to my rescue? And why had the man been so terrified of him? The next day, as we waited for help to arrive at our stranded car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something extraordinary had taken place that night. A night when the past collided with the present in the most unexpected way, revealing depths of my father that I had never known. As we drove away from that abandoned McDonald's, I couldn't help but wonder if there was a chance for reconciliation and healing. A chance for my family to finally find the normalcy I had always longed for. The journey ahead remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again.
Last summer, I started working at Domino's. I'm 32, which is at least 10 years older than all my coworkers, including my boss. It's a humiliating job, but I need the money. I'd worked for years in IT, but after the company went under, I couldn't find anything better than pizza delivery. I hated it. One night, I was at the restaurant taking orders when I answered the call of a woman who needed 3 large pizzas for a party she was having. Even over the phone, I could tell that this was one of those nightmare customers that needed everything to be absolutely perfect. She literally told me the exact number of pepperonis she needed on each slice. I tried to be as polite as possible, even after she made me promise that the pizzas would be exactly how she wanted them. I promised, of course. Then, when it was time to deliver her order, I was the only one available. I was hoping someone else would do it, but all my coworkers were too busy. I got my car, and I drove all the way across town. The woman named Sarah lived in one of those McMansions that tries really hard to look expensive. It had grand columns and a long driveway. I parked at the front and then rang the doorbell. The woman who answered the door looked very different from what I expected. She was gorgeous. She was wearing a red dress and a lot of jewelry. I tried to hand her the pizzas, but she wouldn't take them until I promised that everything was made exactly how she wanted. I assured her that it was. She grabbed the boxes and then stood right in front of me as she opened each one to examine the pizzas. She wouldn't pay me until she checked everything. I stood there awkwardly as she studied the pizzas and counted the number of pepperonis. Then she said, "I'll be right back." She took the pizzas and walked back into the house. She left the door open behind her. I peered into the house, expecting to see other people there, but the place seemed dark and empty. After a few long minutes, she came back out with a little clutch purse. She started digging through it. I assumed she was pulling out the cash, but instead, she pulled out a pistol and pointed it right at my head. I completely froze, raising both arms in the air. What was going on? "You were 3 pepperonis short," she muttered. I tried to apologize, but I was too shocked to speak. "Come inside," she ordered. "Now!" No one had ever pointed a gun at me before. I did what I was told. I walked inside and she closed the door. Then she circled around behind me and shoved the pistol against my back. "Walk," she ordered. She pushed me through the front room and down a long, dark hallway. Then she ordered me to take a left. I ended up in a large bedroom where the oldest man I'd ever seen was lying in a bed. He was hooked up to all these tubes and medical equipment. A heart monitor beeped in the corner. "Honey," Sarah told the man, "the pizzas are wrong." The man said something through the tubes attached to his face, but it didn't sound like real words. I guess Sarah understood what he said perfectly because she answered, "I know, I'm disappointed too." The pizza boxes were already sitting on the table at the foot of the man's bed. They were right next to a giant blender. By now, I was finally able to speak. "What do you want me to do?" She looked at me, smiling for the first time since I'd seen her. Then she screamed as loud as she could, "Apologize to my husband!" I looked down at the man on the bed. He barely looked alive. "I'm, sorry," I said. The man responded, but again I couldn't make out what he was saying. Sarah cocked her gun, still aiming it at me. "Well," she said, "you heard the man." I started crying. I don't know what you want me to do." "Feed him!" she screamed. I walked toward the table and opened one of the pizza boxes. I looked around for plates, but there weren't any, so I just grabbed a slice and started walking toward the man. "Not like that!" she screamed. "He can't eat solid foods!" With her gun, she gestured toward the giant blender on the table. I was still crying. I couldn't help it. I slid the pizza slice into the top of the blender and closed the lid. Then I looked back at Sarah, still confused about what she wanted. "Use the mince setting," she said. I pressed the button labeled mince, and the blender whirred to life. In seconds, it had blended the pizza slice into a brown and red sludge. Then I just stood there, waiting for the woman to tell me what to do. "Jesus!" she screamed. "Just feed him already!" I twisted off the top of the blender and carried it towards her husband's bed. The closer I got to him, the more I could smell him. He smelled like he was already dead. His skin looked like yellow crepe paper. He must have been at least 100 years old. Sarah stared at me, gun still raised. I reached forward and pulled off the plastic breathing thing that was over the man's mouth. Then I tipped the blender cup against his lips and poured the pizza liquid into his mouth. I'll always remember the sound he made as he slurped it up. He swallowed about half of the liquid before he started choking. Behind me, Sarah screamed in horror. "You're killing him! You psycho!" I pulled back the blender cup and set it back on the table as Sarah ran to her husband with a towel. She wiped at his face and kept telling him, "It's okay, baby, it's okay!" And the man kept coughing. I noticed that she'd set down the gun while she was wiping him. Without thinking, I raced out of the room and down the hall. I ran out of the front door and jumped into my car. All the while, I could hear Sarah screaming behind me, "We're not finished!" Terrified and panting, I sped away from that bizarre nightmare, my heart racing. I couldn't comprehend what had just transpired in that McMansion. As I drove down the dimly lit streets, I couldn't shake the image of the elderly man struggling to breathe, drowning in blended pizza. I had inadvertently participated in a macabre episode. The headlights of my car pierced the darkness as I reached the Domino's store. I stumbled through the entrance, my coworkers and boss busy with their usual tasks. I found my boss, Mike, leaning against the counter, scrolling through his phone. "Mike, you won't believe what just happened on that delivery," I stammered. Mike glanced up, his brow furrowed. "What are you talking about? You look like you've seen a ghost." I recounted the bizarre ordeal, from the demanding customer to the elderly man and the horrifying pizza concoction. Mike's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's insane, man. Are you okay?" "Oh, I'm just glad to be out of there," I replied, shuddering. Just then, the door swung open, and Sarah strode in, still wearing that red dress and jewelry. Her presence silenced the room. She fixed her intense gaze on me. You, she said, her tone chillingly calm. You left before I could tip you. Mike stepped forward, a concerned frown etching his face. Listen, lady, you're not tipping someone who went through what you did, he said sternly. Sarah, undeterred, reached into her clutch purse and pulled out an envelope. Not of cash, but a printed letter. She handed it to me, a smug smile on her face. Open it when you get home, she said, her voice dripping with venom. Then she turned and left the store. Curiosity piqued, I cautiously unfolded the letter once she was gone. Inside, I found a job offer from a prestigious tech company, along with an address for an interview the next day. As the reality of my unexpected salvation sunk in, I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to Sarah's twisted game. Nonetheless, I sped towards the address, hoping that the nightmare was truly over and that a brighter future awaited me.
I got Snapchat a little later than the rest of my peers. I didn't really see the point of sending pictures that only lasted a couple of seconds before they disappear forever. It seemed silly and trivial to me. But after consistent badgering, my best friend managed to persuade me to download it so that she could send me funny pictures in class. Even then, I rarely used it unless I was really bored, since I only had a few friends on there. A couple of weeks after getting the app, a new name appeared on my list of friends. I didn't remember adding anyone, and it wasn't a name that I recognized, so I was confused as to how they had been added. I sent them a message asking, "Who is this?" I figured it was just someone from my class who had found my username from one of my friends, but I wanted to make sure it wasn't some stranger. The thing with Snapchat was there was no kind of censoring. People could send you anything without consequences, since proof of it would vanish as soon as the picture disappeared. Shadowstalker 193 opened the message a few seconds later, and I waited for a reply. Instead of a message, they sent me a picture. I was wary of opening it, but I figured I could simply click off of it if it was anything disturbing, and then block them from sending anything else. With a faint flutter of anticipation in my chest, I opened the image. It was nothing but a black screen, but fuzzy around the edges, as though someone was covering the camera with their finger. It lasted 5 seconds before disappearing. I rolled my eyes and sent a reply. Okay? That still doesn't tell me who you are. Becca, is this you? You're not funny, you know. My messages went unanswered after that, and I figured it was probably just one of my friends messing with me. Just to be safe though, I blocked the user from being able to send me anything else. I ended up completely pushing it out of my mind and forgetting about it, until a couple of days later, when my phone pinged with a notification. It was after school, and I was waiting at the bus stop with a couple of other students. I dug my phone out of my pocket and saw that I had a new Snapchat alert. Shadowstalker 193 sent you a snap. I frowned. I thought I had blocked this user from being able to send me messages. Had I not done it properly? The wind picked up, blowing my hair against my cheek as my finger hovered over open. What had they sent me this time? Another dark, blurry photograph of nothing. Bracing myself, I pressed the notification. The picture only lasted a few seconds, but I saw enough of it to know who it was. It was a photo of me, standing at the bus stop, exactly where I was now. With the start, I dragged my gaze away from my phone and looked around, but nobody was looking at me. Who had taken this picture? With a frustrated sigh, I sent a reply. Seriously, who is this? Another picture popped up. Me frowning down at my phone. Whoever Shadowstalker 193 was, they were here right this second, taking photos of me across the street. But when I looked up, there was nobody there. Judging from the angle and the closeness, they should have been within sight. But the only people around me were other students, and none of them seemed to be the culprit. Shaking my head, I went to Shadowstalker 193's profile and deleted them from my friends list. Now they shouldn't be able to send me any more messages. I cast another wary look around, a shiver of unease creeping down my spine. The thought of someone I didn't know taking photos of me was enough to make me nervous. I'd hoped it was just one of my friends playing a prank on me, but I doubted they would take it this far without revealing themselves. Shoving my phone back into my pocket, I was relieved when the bus crested the hill and I followed the other students on board. The door slid shut and we were just about to set off when my phone buzzed again. Shadowstalker 193 sent you a snap. I choked out a gasp. What the heck? Hadn't I just deleted them? With a trembling hand, I opened the app and clicked on their name. The photo that came up was a blurred picture of me sitting by the window in the bus. I quickly glanced down the street before the bus pulled away, but there was nobody there. I continued to receive pictures from Shadowstalker 193 over the next few days. I told my friends about it, but all of them denied being involved. And I had no reason to doubt them. Whoever was messing with me, it wasn't someone I knew. No matter how many times I blocked them or deleted them from my friends list, they were still able to send me messages. Each picture was of me, walking my dog through the park, standing outside the school, even one of my dad and I at the grocery store. They were clearly stalking me, but I had no proof of it since the pictures only lasted a few seconds, disappearing in a heartbeat. I tried to ignore the notifications, but they would send more until I gave in and opened them, each photo closer and clearer than before. Yet whenever I looked around for the culprit, there was nobody. Nobody on their phones, nobody looking at me, nobody acting suspicious. I was running out of options. In the end, I deleted the app completely. If blocking didn't work, then this was the only way to stop Shadowstalker 193 from being able to send me messages. Or so I thought. That night, I woke up to my phone pinging against the nightstand. Groggily, I checked the time. It was a little after 3 o'clock in the morning. Who would be messaging me at this hour? As soon as I unlocked the phone, my heart plummeted into my stomach. Shadowstalker 193 has sent you a snap. How is this possible? I deleted the app from my phone. How could it have reinstalled itself? I sat up in bed, my breaths tumbling out in short, sharp gasps as I clicked the message. There were 3 new pictures. The first one took me a second to recognize in the dim lighting. It was my street, under the cover of night. The second picture was similar, a view of my house from the neighbor's fence. The third one made my blood run cold. It was a photo of my house, from the front, aglow in the moonlight. Taken 48 seconds ago. Did this mean... I threw back my covers and leapt up from the bed, stalking over to the window. I dragged open the curtains and peered out. A second later, from directly across the street, came the flash from a camera. I instantly ducked down below the window, my heart pounding in my chest, fear settling in my bones. They were outside my house. Freaking out, I ran to my dad's room like I was a kid afraid of a nightmare. I shook him awake with frantic movements, and he sat up, rubbing his eyes. "Amy," he mumbled, staring at me through the dimness. "Has something happened?" They're outside," I blurted. "They're outside the house. The one who's been taking pictures of me. They're out there right now." That seemed to jolt him awake, and he scrambled out of bed, telling me to stay inside while he went to investigate. I ran back to my room, huddling under the covers while I waited for my dad to come back. Why was this happening to me? Who were they? This creep watching me from the shadows, unseen, unheard, invading my life like this. I heard footsteps across the hallway and waited for my dad to appear. He didn't. Instead, my phone pinged with another notification. I wanted to ignore it, to throw my phone out the window and hope that it broke. But instead, I opened Snapchat and checked the last message from Shadowstalker 193. The air around me stilled as I opened it, dread settling like rock in my stomach. The picture was of me, sitting on my bed in semi-darkness. My dad burst into the room just as my scream filled the air. He didn't hesitate, rushing to my side, fear etched across his face. "Sweetie, what's wrong?" he asked, scanning the room for any intruders. I pointed at the doorway, still trembling with terror. "Someone's outside, Dad. They took a picture of me." My voice quivered. Dad's eyes narrowed as he moved closer to the window, but there was no one there. He turned back to me, his expression perplexed. "I don't see anyone, Amy. Are you sure you're not imagining things?" Dad reached for my phone, scrolling through the recent messages. Shadowstalker 193's latest image was still there, a chilling reminder of the intruder in our home. We both stared at the haunting photo of me sitting on my bed. Then, suddenly, my dad's eyes widened with realization. He was a computer engineer by profession. He turned to me, a mix of fear and urgency in his voice. "Amy, this isn't a regular Snapchat account. It's using other people's phone cameras to take these photos." My heart raced as I tried to comprehend what he meant. "What? How is that possible?" He grabbed my phone and quickly went into the app settings. After a few moments, he found something that made his face go pale. "Your Snapchat account isn't the only one logged in." I stared at him, unable to process the implications. "What do you mean?" "Someone else has access to your phone," Dad said, his voice strained. "They're not just using Snapchat. They're controlling your camera, your notifications, everything. And similarly, they are controlling other people's phones as well." A shiver of horror ran down my spine. "But how?" Dad's expression darkened. "We have to figure that out, Amy. We need to trace this person, stop them from invading your privacy." As we began our investigation, it became clear that we were dealing with a sophisticated hacker who had infiltrated my phone, turning it into a tool for their malicious intent. Not visible to me, several images showed up on my phone. Images of strangers, guys and girls. Some of the images I couldn't even look at with my dad being there beside me. Our quest to unmask Shadowstalker 193 took unexpected turns, revealing secrets we never could have anticipated. While we were determined to unveil the identity of the stalker, with the help of the cops, we discovered that Shadowstalker 193 was not just one person, but a group of hackers, each with their own chilling agenda. They weren't just after me. They had targeted others as well. Unmasking them would prove to be an even more daunting task than we had ever imagined. It has been 6 months since this incident, and none of the hackers have been caught so far. At first, I thought it was funny that a plastic surgery clinic was named House of Plastic Horrors. I thought that perhaps there was some kind of sick joke about how horrifying people's faces were before plastic surgery, and then it got better after. Or maybe it had to do with how puffy and horrifying a person looked immediately after plastic surgery before it cooled down and began to heal. Then, I had no idea how very wrong I was about what it meant, and I was about to find out exactly why. My parents had always been against plastic surgery, but I had just turned 19 and thought of myself as a fully grown adult who could do whatever they wanted. But I lived with them, so getting the surgery under their roof was not going to happen. So I needed to get away, even if it was for a little while. Long enough for me to have the plastic surgery, heal, and then I could show my parents how it made me look much prettier than I was right now. I didn't have insecurities when it came to my face and body, or at least I pretended not to. But I hated the way my nose was slightly crooked and how my jawline wasn't as sharp as that of Natalie Stone, a popular celebrity who was gorgeous. I didn't like a few other things on my face. So I decided I would be getting the surgery, just not in my city. I had a cousin living nearby in the town of Carrollton. I decided to pay her a visit to her small town, and to my surprise, they had a plastic surgery clinic. It was named House of Plastic Horrors, and I could remember giggling with my cousin about the silly name before telling her that I wanted to get surgery there. She wasn't too ecstatic about it, but it wasn't like she could stop me. I didn't care that I was taking a risk. I hated the crook in my nose every time I looked in the mirror. So the next day, I booked into the place, ready to come out looking gorgeous. I was more excited than I was nervous, which was telling as to how badly I wanted this plastic surgery. I had a lot of expectations as to how the surgery was going to be, but it was nothing like the way I expected it. The building was on the outskirts of town, far away from civilization. I made a joke about how much this would have been a perfect murder scene, but I thought it would be too dark to share with the receptionist, who welcomed me in and told me to wait a little for the doctors. She assured me that they knew what they were doing, and then she gave me a few papers to sign before I set foot further into the facility. This was when I should have realized that things weren't as they were. I was greeted by the doctor, a man in his mid-30s, and I tried to explain to him exactly what I wanted for my face. But he didn't listen to any of what I had to say, and instead he responded, "I know how to perfectly take care of your face." It should have been assuring the way he said it, but he gave me such an eerie smile that suddenly made my stomach flip. I simply nodded. "Okay, well, how much does it cost?" "We can negotiate when we are done with you." The man said. This should have set me off, and I should have left the place or demanded further explanation. Heck, maybe I should have read through those NDA documents I had signed blindly a few moments ago, or I would have known what I had truly signed. The doctor and another female doctor led me into a secluded room, and they promised me with one of their creepy smiles that the room was soundproof, so I could scream as I wanted and no one would hear me. I laughed at the joke, and they laughed along with me. I had read about how plastic surgery works. I would be given numbing cream, so it didn't hurt much. They strapped me into a chair and told me it was crucial that I didn't move. One wrong move and I could paralyze my whole face. I sat still, not wanting something as terrible to happen to me. The female doctor's smile eased up, and it didn't look as sharp and scary anymore. If anything, she looked like she was pitying me. She asked me, "Are you sure you want this?" "I do," and I told her that. But from her eyes, it looked as though I had given her the wrong answer. The female doctor explained how she was the wife of the male doctor, and then proceeded to ask me for my name. "Maya," I said. She replied, "Well, you have such beautiful eyes, Maya, so green and pretty." I didn't know what else to say, and then she continued to ask me a few questions. She was distracting me from what would be happening soon, and I welcomed that distraction, because although I acted all macho, I was secretly afraid of this entire procedure. "The doctor will arrive soon," the lady assured me just as he walked in. He held such weird surgery tools in his hands that I couldn't even imagine how they worked on my face. And the one that caught my attention was the one in the shape of a spoon. I looked around for the numbing cream, but I couldn't see anything. I didn't know a person could be so naive and trusting as I was that day, as I sat there strapped against a metal chair that was biting against my skin. "This is going to hurt a little," the doctor muttered as he held a tool that whirred and spun in his hands. It had a sharp end that looked like it could pierce through my skin. By then, I wanted out of it. But it was too late. My pleas to leave fell on deaf ears. I didn't want the plastic surgery anymore, and I just wanted to go back home. It hurt, more than a little, and there was nothing I could do as the doctor drilled holes around my eyes at first. My screams bounced around the walls as the doctor used this spoon-like tool to gouge out my eyes one by one. He was careful not to harm my eyes, careful not to poke at them as he took them out of my sockets. I screamed and I cried, but it was useless. That was when they told me everything. That the papers I'd signed earlier were me giving up my eyes, my precious green eyes, and every other organ that they could take out of me. But they wouldn't kill me, they assured me. But wasn't death better than this? They said I would be compensated with a bit of money. But how useless would it be when I couldn't even spend as much as I could? Next was one of my kidneys, and the horrible doctor performed surgery on me without anesthesia. I bled so much that my head was so dizzy. I felt sticky blood that I couldn't see. I was terrified of what they would take next, and if it ever ended. Was it one of my limbs next, or two others? It didn't matter as long as I wasn't dead. They could take all my fingers if they could. I was living a nightmare, and I couldn't even get the plastic surgery I wanted. I cried and cried, but nobody heard me, and hope was dwindling with every second that I spent in this horrid place. I didn't even want to make it out alive in the horror of having to live a life deprived of so many of my organs. Life would be pointless. Despair filled my every bone as the doctor sawed away parts of my body that I would never get. This was never a plastic surgery clinic. It was all a farce and trick to get their hands on my organs and sell them for their own gain. I was left to my own despair after everything. The doctors left no trail that the police could track. My sister Ellen invited me to McDonald's so we could have dinner and make peace. I'd just gotten engaged to her ex-boyfriend Scott, which had caused a big rift in our relationship. Ellen had called me a homewrecker and refused to talk to me. That was about a month before, but then she called me up and said she was ready to meet. I thought that McDonald's was a weird choice, especially the one she picked, which was in a sketchier part of town. But I really wanted my sister to forgive me, even though I didn't do anything wrong, so I agreed to meet her. When I got there, Ellen was already inside. She smiled at me and waved. She was even wearing the scarf I gave her last Christmas. I had a good feeling that this was going to be a nice conversation. Maybe she'd finally give me her blessing to marry Scott. Ellen met me inside and we both ordered. She kept looking behind the cashier and into the kitchen, as if she was trying to see something. But I didn't think anything of it. Then we sat down at a table and talked. We were the only ones there, so we didn't have to censor ourselves. Ellen told me that I'd really hurt her feelings, but she'd gotten over it. She said that she knew the love between me and Scott was real and she couldn't fight that. It felt so nice to hear her say that. I told her that I'd really missed her, and I tried to ask her if she was free to hang out sometime this week, but she cut me off. She said she had to run to the bathroom for a second. It was longer than a second. I waited at that table for about 10 minutes and she never came back. There were no other customers and I didn't see the worker anywhere, so it was just me alone in the restaurant. I started to get a weird feeling, so I went to the bathroom to check on her and she wasn't there. I went back to the main area of the restaurant and looked out the windows. Her car was still parked outside, so I knew she hadn't left. I knew I shouldn't do this because it was against the rules, and since none of the workers were there, I hopped the counter and looked into the kitchen. That too was empty. Where was everybody? I went to the back door to see if they were maybe smoking behind the restaurant or something, but the door wouldn't open. It wasn't locked though. Something was jamming it from the outside. I ran back to the front of the restaurant and saw Ellen outside the glass front doors. She smiled and waved at me as she was pushing a trash can in front of the door. She was trapping me in here. I pushed on the door, but it wouldn't budge. Ellen stood right outside and smiled at me. "What are you doing?" I asked her. "I'm burning away my problems," she said. That's when I smelled the smoke. It was very faint, but getting stronger, and it was coming from the men's bathroom. I rushed in and saw that all the used paper towels in the garbage can were on fire. The room was filled with smoke. I kicked it over, trying to stamp out the fire, but that just made things worse. The fire spread to the walls, which were coated by some flammable chemical. I ran back into the main room. From what I could tell, my sister had lured me to this place, spread around lighter fluid or something, lit a fire, and then locked me inside. She was trying to murder me in the most elaborate way possible. I pounded on the front door, but Ellen just watched me from the other side of the glass. By now, the whole restaurant was filling with smoke. I could barely breathe. I begged for Ellen to let me out, but she didn't say anything. She just smiled. Since the front door was a dead end, I figured that my only way out was through the back. Covering my mouth, I hopped over the counter and ran through the kitchen. I tried the back door again, but it was still blocked. It was so hot in the building, I was losing strength. Everything was blurry. I desperately tried to ram my shoulder against the door, but it wouldn't budge. Eventually, I gave up and collapsed onto the ground. I knew that I was going to die, but I hoped that it would be through suffocation. That seemed better than burning. But just as everything went dark, I saw a sliver of light in front of me. The back door was opening. Soon, a hand reached in and pulled me out of the building. I was stretched out in the parking lot with my savior looking down on me. I still couldn't see her face, but I knew that it was my sister. She changed her mind and saved me at the last minute. But when my vision cleared, I saw that it wasn't my sister at all. It was the McDonald's worker. She explained that Ellen had paid her $300 to leave us alone in the restaurant for 20 minutes. She had second thoughts about it though and came back early. That's when she found me. She had no idea that Ellen planned to burn down the place. Pretty soon, the firemen came. They used their hoses to put out the fire, while one stayed behind to check on me. The police came too, and they took the McDonald's worker away. I wasn't sure what kind of trouble she was in, but I told her that I'd testify on her behalf if there was ever a trial. After all, she saved my life. Once the fire was completely out, the firemen gave me a breathing test and told me I could go. I started walking around the burnt building to get to my car, but the fireman shouted at me to stop. There was something in front of the building that he didn't want me to see. I didn't listen, of course, and kept walking. That's when I saw Ellen, or what was left of her. She was lying right in front of the entrance, horribly burnt. Half of her face was unrecognizable. She was dead. The fireman came up behind me and put his hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked. "What happened?" He explained that my sister tried to run away from the fire, but her scarf had gotten caught under the trash can. She tried to get free, but her scarf caught on fire, and then so did she. He asked me again if I was okay. I thought for a second. Then I said, "Yeah, never better." My name is Sam. I've worked at Subway for 3 years. It's an okay job, and I really like my coworkers. Unfortunately, our regional manager pulled me aside and told me that I needed to change locations to another Subway that was understaffed. I was upset because my regular location was very close to my house, and the new one was in a really sketchy part of town. It wasn't surprising that they couldn't get enough workers. My first couple shifts in the new location went fine. I worked alongside a teenager named Gus who seemed nice enough, but on Saturday, I had to take the night shift by myself. Gus warned me to be careful because a lot of creeps came out at night. I told him that I wasn't scared, but deep down, I really didn't want to be there. When my shift started, it was still daylight. A few customers came in and nothing strange happened. But right after the sun set, a homeless man walked in. I recognized him from one of the posters we had on the wall. He was one of several people who were banned from the restaurant because of some past issue, usually stealing or starting fights. I wish the poster had said why he was banned, so then I would know what to look for. He walked in, and I politely told him that he wasn't allowed to eat here. I'm not a very confrontational person, and I've never had to kick anyone out before, so I kept things as short and direct as possible. He didn't leave. Instead, he stepped closer and looked down at my name tag. "Sam," he said. "It looks like you're all alone here tonight." "Please, leave," I told him again. That was when he smiled at me. It was the most unnerving smile I'd ever seen, like he was mocking me, like he was laughing on the inside as he waited for me to physically remove him from the restaurant or something. I pulled out my phone, ready to call the police, but he said, "I wouldn't do that if I were you. You live on 12th Street, right?" My blood froze. How did he know that? I lied and told him no. "No, you do," he said. "A little blue house. You have 2 cats. It would be a shame if something were to happen to them." Was he threatening me? Was he threatening my cats? Still smiling, he promised that he wouldn't hurt me as long as I made him a sandwich. All I wanted was for him to go away. I knew that if I called the police, he might start something. I figured the only thing I could do was to take his order and wait for him to leave. So I asked him what he wanted, and he ordered a 6-inch tuna sandwich with nothing else on it. As I was fixing it for him, he could see that my hands were shaking. I was really trying hard to appear brave, but I wasn't fooling him. Once I got the sandwich ready, he tried to pay me with a crisp $100 bill. I didn't know for sure, but I got the distinct feeling that it was either counterfeit or stolen. I refused to take it and told him that it was on the house. I knew that I'd have to pay for his sandwich out of my own money, but as long as I got him out of there, I didn't mind. Without thanking me, he grabbed the sandwich and then sat down at a table in the corner. I politely asked him to eat the sandwich somewhere else, thinking that paying for his meal had given me a bit of leverage. But he just shook his head and said, "No thank you, I'm fine right here." I stood behind the counter and pretended he wasn't there. He ate his sandwich very slowly, staring at me the whole time. After a few minutes of silence, he said, "Hey Sam, how's your mom doing? She lives in Phoenix, right?" "No," I told him, but that was a lie. "It must be difficult for an old woman like her to live all alone," he said. I hope she's safe. Once again, he sounded like he was threatening me. Talking about my cats was one thing, but talking about my mother? That was too far. I walked around the counter and marched toward his table. "What's your problem?" I asked him. He didn't answer. He just kept chewing. I told him he had 5 more minutes, and then he had to get out of there. He still didn't answer. I'd had enough. I pulled out my phone and started to dial the police. Before I started the call, I told him that this was his last chance to leave. He said, "If you call the police, I will track down everything that you love, and I will destroy it all." Clearly, this guy was crazy. I still didn't know how he knew so much about my life, but I decided not to think about that. I called 911 and told him that we have an unruly customer. The man got out of his chair and walked toward the front door. "You've made your decision," he said. "I'm very sorry." And then he was gone. I called 911 again and tried to tell them not to come, but a policeman was already on his way. When he got there, I explained what happened and his eyes went wide. He asked what the homeless man looked like, and I showed him the poster on the wall. The policeman said that I just made an enemy with a very dangerous person. He told me that if I ever saw the man again, I needed to apologize. It seemed like such a weird thing for a policeman to say. He didn't even bother writing down the information for his reports. He just left. When my shift ended, I went home and saw that my back window was wide open. I knew that I had closed it before I left. The first thing I thought was that the man had snuck in. Slowly, I walked through the house and checked every room. I didn't see any signs of an intruder. I finally started to calm down until I realized that I didn't see my cats either. They were gone. I'd had both cats for years now, and they've never tried to run away before. Had they wandered off? Had the homeless man taken them? I tried to go to sleep, but I was too nervous. I ended up just lying in my bed thinking about how that man had promised to come after everything that I loved. The next day, I put up flyers around the neighborhood for my missing cats. It was my day off from work, so I stayed home and ordered a pizza. As I was eating, my phone rang. It was my mother. When I answered, her voice sounded frantic. I asked her what was wrong, and she said that her house had been burned down in the night. Everything was destroyed. Thankfully, she was okay. I knew this had something to do with that man's warning. I had to track him down and apologize before anything worse happened. I ended up calling my coworker Gus and told him everything. I didn't even need to describe the man. Gus knew exactly who I was talking about. I asked him what I could do, and he told me there was nothing I could do. No one knew when that man would show up or what misery he'd bring with him. All I could do was be careful. For the rest of the week, a string of terrible things happened to me. I crashed my car and completely totaled it. I fell on my porch and nearly broke my arm. And my cats still hadn't come back. I was constantly on edge, always looking around me. When Saturday rolled around, I once again got the night shift. I felt anxious, silently hoping that the homeless man would come back. For the whole night, I kept looking out the front door to see if he'd come back. He never did. It's been 3 weeks and I still haven't seen him again. My bad luck keeps continuing, and I honestly don't know if it's all a coincidence or if it's because of that man. Either way, he got what he wanted.
I was in town for an impromptu business trip and needed somewhere to stay for the night. I hadn't been able to book anywhere in advance, so I ended up driving around until I managed to find a motel with a vacancy. There was only one car in the parking lot, and the street lamp was faulty, flickering out a grayish-white light across the pavement. But I was tired from a day packed with meetings and just wanted somewhere to sleep for the night. I left my luggage in my car and locked it before heading into the dingy, dimly lit reception. The place was less than clean, the air thick with dust and mildew, but I really didn't want to have to find somewhere else. I figured I'd just have to deal with some shabby accommodations for a night. A young, pale-looking man was seated at the desk. Behind him, a fly buzzed around a patch of dampness on the wall. Excuse me?" I said, when he didn't immediately stir at my arrival. He lifted his gaze slowly. His eyes were sunken and dark, his cheeks gaunt. For a moment, I had debated just getting the hell out of there. But finally, he spoke. "Need a room?" I cleared my throat. "Yeah, just for one night." He nodded, reaching beneath the counter for a key. "Card or cash?" Cash? I didn't trust a place like this not to steal my card details when I wasn't looking. He grunted softly, punching something into the old-fashioned till in front of him. It was as cheap as I was expecting for a night at a place like this, and that made me doubt my decision to stay here even more. Maybe I should have kept looking for someplace nicer. "Room 4 on the left," he said, his voice a low drawl. I took the key and thanked him before leaving. It wasn't until I was back outside that I noticed it had smelled odd in there. Something beyond the dust and grime, something almost sweet. Grabbing my luggage from my car, I let myself into room 4 and flicked on the light. I looked around. The room was minimal, sparsely furnished and a little dusty, but decent enough. As long as there weren't any bed bugs, I wasn't too picky. I made sure the door was locked before shrugging off my jacket and doing a cursory check of the room. The sheets were a little musty smelling, but seemed clean, and the trash bin was empty. That at least was a good sign. When I circled around the other side of the bed, I grimaced. There was a large stain on the carpet. Old, well sunken into the fabric, but unmistakable in its rusty brown-red hue. Blood. No doubt a place like this had some kind of sordid history. As long as I wasn't at risk. There was a closet, but I didn't bother opening it. I would be leaving first thing in the morning anyway. The bathroom was as grimy and stained as everything else, and there was some old hair clogging the shower drain, so I decided to forgo showering and wait until I got home. I was too exhausted to do anything else, and I collapsed straight into bed without bothering to change out of my clothes. It was in the middle of the night when I heard the closet doors slide open. I blinked open my eyes, darkness surrounding me. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then I remembered. The business conference, the shady motel. That's when it hit me. The reason why I woke up in the first place. I had heard the soft hiss of a door sliding open. I sat up in a panic, thinking there was someone in my room. My eyes adjusted to the darkness and I looked around. Nobody here. I was alone. Had I just imagined it? Breathing hard through my nose, I waited for my pulse to stop racing and got out of bed, switching on the lamp. Nothing happened. I tried again, then gave up. Of course, the lamp was broken. Relying on my own vision, I crept through the darkness towards the closet. I had nothing to defend myself with, so I just bunched my hand into a fist and got ready to punch the first thing that jumped out at me. With a bated breath, I threw open the closet doors. They were empty. I heaved a sigh of relief. I must have just imagined it after all. I was about to close them again when I heard something. A soft thump and a yell from the other side of the wall. I froze. Holding my breath again, I listened. On the other side of the wall, I heard this shuffle of movement and then silence. If the walls were this thin, then it likely wasn't my closet doors I had heard open, but the ones next door. I hadn't seen any other cars in the parking lot, so who else was staying here? Curious, I stepped into the closet to listen closer. That's when I realized there was a small hole in the wall, moonlight peeking through it. The hole was small enough to go unnoticed, but large enough to peer through if I squinted. Positioning my eye against the hole, I looked through to the other side. At first, I saw nothing but darkness, then a shadow moving across the room, and something lying on the ground. A figure, bathed in a pale moonlight, a red stain slowly spreading around their lifeless body. Horror gripped my chest, but I couldn't look away from the gruesome visage. It was only when another eye appeared on the other side of the hole that I managed to yank away from the wall, staggering back and almost tripping over the edge of the bed. What had I gotten myself into? Fumbling to grab my phone, I immediately dialed the police, but my phone wouldn't connect to the call. Something was jamming the signal. My heart froze in my chest when I heard footsteps walking outside. I turned slowly to face the door, the phone almost slipping from my fingers. Not a second later, the handle began to turn. My heart pounded in my chest as the doorknob slowly turned, and I felt a surge of panic. I had no idea who or what was on the other side of that door, but the events of the night had left me on edge. With the phone signal jammed and no way to call for help, I had to rely on my own wits and instincts to survive this eerie motel encounter. As the door creaked open, I grabbed the closest object I could find, a heavy lamp from the nightstand, and held it tightly in my trembling hands. The dim, flickering light from the faulty street lamp outside cast eerie shadows in the room, making it even harder to discern who was entering. A figure emerged from the darkness, shrouded in a long, tattered coat. Their face was obscured, and they moved silently, almost ghost-like. My heart raced as I tightened my grip on the lamp, ready to defend myself if necessary. The intruder took a few steps into the room, their intentions unclear. Were they the one responsible for the gruesome scene next door? Or were they just another weary traveler who had chosen this rundown motel for the night? I couldn't be sure. Before I could react, the figure turned towards me, and I braced myself for whatever might happen next. But instead of aggression, I saw a glimmer of fear and desperation in their eyes. They looked as terrified as I felt. "Who are you?" I managed to stammer, my voice barely above a whisper. The stranger hesitated for a moment, then finally spoke in a hushed tone. "You need to get out of here, now." I didn't need any more convincing. Without a second thought, I bolted for the door, leaving my belongings behind. The stranger followed closely behind, and together we hurried down the dimly lit hallway, past the reception desk where the pale-faced motel clerk was nowhere to be seen. We reached the exit, and as I pushed open the door, a wave of relief washed over me. We were outside, away from the unsettling motel. I turned to the stranger, my heart still racing, and asked, "What's going on? What did you see?" The stranger's voice quivered as they replied, "I saw something terrible, something I can't explain. This place is cursed, and those who stay here don't leave. We have to go now." We didn't waste any more time. We jumped into my car and sped away from that eerie motel, leaving it behind in the darkness. As we drove, the stranger finally introduced himself as the fellow traveler who had made the mistake of staying in that motel a few nights earlier. He had seen things that defied explanation. We both knew we had narrowly escaped something sinister, something that lurked within the motel's walls. It was a night I would never forget, a night that left me with more questions than answers, and a deep sense of unease whenever I thought about that blood-stained carpet and the horrors that had unfolded in the rooms next door.
Before my mom died, she told me her only regret was never seeing a lighthouse. It may seem like a small regret, but we lived in Kansas. The furthest my mother ever traveled was to the Grand Tetons in Wyoming, so she never saw the ocean. Her dying wish was for her ashes to be spread in the water that a lighthouse watches over. She hung pictures of one in Maine that she was particularly fond of, so it needed to be that one. As I processed her death and prepared to go to the lighthouse, I thought, why stop at one? Why not show her the entire East Coast so she can finally experience the ocean? So, I planned the road trip. I decided to take it alone to help process my mom's passing in peace. I started in North Carolina and saw a lighthouse in every state going up to Maine. Along the way, I stayed in hotels and Airbnbs. Airbnbs were cheaper, but something happened and I only stayed in hotels after this one. I rolled up to the yellow cottage with red brick detailing, thinking it was the cutest home I have ever seen. I knocked on the door and was greeted by a sweet lady, probably in her 60s. She wore white capri pants and a blue paisley shirt. "Sylvia?" she inquired after opening the door. "Yes, Linda?" "Oh, yes, come in, come in. You're my first guest, so please excuse my excitement." The inside was as cute and quaint as the outside, except for the pictures that lined the walls. There was not one square inch of wall space that didn't have a picture of this girl who looked like Linda, but with a different nose. She had the same coloring as me. Pale skin, dark hair, and green eyes. "Is this your daughter?" "Yes, I lost her 5 years ago to cancer." "Oh, I'm sorry for your loss," I started. I was about to explain my road trip and how my mom passed, but I didn't want to make the moment about me. "She was something," said Linda. "She graduated top of her class. No matter what she did, she made me so proud. After her father died, she moved in with me to keep me company. She was a special one. Like they say, only the good die young." I stood there, not knowing what to say. Linda picked up on that and said, "How about I show you to your room?" She led me up the stairs. The bedroom was at the end of the hall next to the bathroom. She told me it was her daughter's room. She hadn't changed a thing since she died. The room remained a memorial to her. Linda started listing it on Airbnb because she needed the extra money to make ends meet. It was weird and felt as such. Linda told me she was making a roast that would be ready in an hour if I wanted to join her. After being on the road for a week at this point, my mouth watered at the idea of a home-cooked meal. Just looking at Linda, I knew she would make a mean roast. I wanted to stretch my legs after being in the car all day, so I asked her if any places nearby had a pretty view. A quick walk before dinner sounded nice. There was a nice park nearby. She gave me the directions and told me it was 30 minutes there and back. Either the park was better than Linda let on, or it just felt nice to be outside. It was a large park with a wide open field. In one corner was an impressive playground that would widen any kid's eyes. I found a bench under one of the massive trees to sit on as I read my book and watched the people enjoy their loved ones' company. I lost track of time and was about 30 minutes late to the roast. I opened the front door and Linda came around the corner with a butcher knife. "You're late," she said blatantly. Something in her demeanor was different. She was much less warm and much more severe this time. "Sorry, yeah, it felt really nice to be outside, and I lost track of time." I walked further into the house, and Linda scurried behind me to lock the door. "Well, it's ready. Let's eat." I was right. Linda could make a mean roast. She was a natural hostess. It was easy to tell she missed the days when her life had dinner parties. Still holding the butcher knife, she slammed it into the wooden board the roast sat on before cutting me a slice. It was delicious. I scarfed it down. In no time, I was asking for seconds. "You know, you kind of look like Patty." "Your daughter?" Linda slowly nodded her head. "What are the odds that my first Airbnb guest looks just like my daughter? An angel must have sent you." At this point, I realized that Linda wasn't eating. Her plate was full of meat, vegetables, and potatoes, but she had not taken a single bite. Maybe that is a weird coincidence, but the only things we really have in common is that we're pale with black hair. "I think you're meant to stay with me." I tried asking what she meant, but the words felt tangled in my mouth. My head started to feel heavy. I woke up tied to the chair with a piece of fabric tied around my head so I couldn't speak. Linda was brushing my hair. My clothes were different. I was now wearing a pink sundress that was too big for me. I began to wiggle out of the ropes, but Linda knew how to tie a knot. I went over how to get out of this situation. Linda was older, so I could outrun her and fight her off. But first, I would need to get untied. Instead of struggling or breaking the chair, I decided to play into her delusion. We talked like I was Patty, or how I think Patty would speak. Linda's eyes sparkled looking at me. Her daughter and I looked nothing alike besides our coloring, so I wasn't sure what caused this madness. I convinced her to untie the knots, and she did. Upon releasing me, I grabbed the first heavy thing I could find and whacked her in the head. Linda fell like a tree. I ran upstairs to get my things and keys, but I couldn't find the car keys. She must have taken them while I was knocked out. I tore through her kitchen looking for them, but I didn't have them. I needed to get out before she came to. I threw my stuff in the car and tried to remember how to hotwire my car. I dated a guy a few years back who showed me how. I ripped the plastic off under the steering wheel and found the required wires. I stripped them and held them together until the car started. I pressed on the gas and didn't stop driving until I had to.
It was just before midnight, and I was on my last delivery of the night. The address was in a part of town I'd never heard of before, and I had to plug it into my GPS system to even figure out which direction to go. As I left behind the cozy suburban neighborhoods and the street lamps became sparser and dimmer, I started to question if I was going the right way after all. Who would be ordering pizza all the way out here? I left the highway and ended up on a dusty old track in the middle of nowhere, my GPS estimating me to be 5 minutes away. I could only hope that I'd be getting a generous tip for driving all the way out here. Surely only someone with a big mansion or a farmhouse would live out here in the outskirts of town. I followed the track between the trees, the road rutted with stones and dips that sent me, and the pizza sliding all over the place. Finally, the road evened out, and I found myself driving up the gravel path towards a large, shadowy house, 3 stories high, with dark gray bricks and a black roof. There was something inherently gothic and eerie about the place. Who would live in a house like this, if not for some old-fashioned recluse? It didn't strike me as the kind of place that belonged to someone who ordered pizza takeout, especially just before midnight. Was it some kids messing with me? Nevertheless, this was the address we'd been given, and I couldn't finish up my shift until the last pizza had been delivered and paid for. Gathering myself, I parked the car outside the tall black trellis fence and climbed out, grabbing the still-hot pizza box and tucking it beneath my arm. The whole house was dark, shrouded in the gloom of dusk. It didn't even look like anyone was home. I was starting to suspect that this was some kind of prank after all, some kids calling the poor old delivery driver out to the middle of nowhere for laughs. The thought made me grit my teeth, but I stepped up to the fence anyway. The latch was undone, so I pushed it open, wincing as it let out a low creak that wailed off into the night. The front lawn was overgrown and choked with weeds and tall wiry grass that crunched when I walked over it, unable to see the path in the dark. There was nothing but the lights from my car to light the way. If they went out, then I would be stranded in pitch darkness, nothing but the dim glow of the moon to light my way. I walked up to the front porch and threw a glance over the dark windows. Was this place abandoned after all? Shifting the pizza box, I raised a fist and knocked. The wood peeled and flaked beneath my touch. No answer. No lights came on. Either there was nobody home, or they were already deep asleep. I knocked again, shifting my feet impatiently. I'd rather not class this order as undelivered, but if there was nobody to pay me and take it off my hands, I wouldn't have a choice. The wind wailed quietly through the house's rafters as I waited, to no avail. Just as I was about to turn around and head back to the car, a faint light flickered on in one of the windows. The light was dim, barely cutting through the dusk, but it gave me the sign I needed that someone was in there after all. With a sigh, I went to knock again. The moment my fist touched the flaky wood, the door creaked open. I waited, darkness pooling at my feet, but nobody appeared. "Hello?" I called, nudging the door open wider. "Pizza delivery? Anyone there?" No answer. Was someone really messing with me at midnight on a Friday evening? Growing impatient, I pushed the door open fully and stepped inside. The entryway was empty. Dust hung heavy and clouded in the air, the smell of mildew seeping through the fresh air blowing in through the doorway. "Pizza delivery," I called out. "Anyone home?" When nobody came to greet me, I decided to head further in, to the room where the light had been. Maybe they were an invalid, unable to answer the door on their own? If there was someone here, then I wasn't leaving until I got paid for the pizza. The rest of the house was eerily quiet. Nothing stirred except for the dust billowing out from my breath. The entire place seemed like it hadn't been touched for years. It felt abandoned, unlived in, untouched by human warmth for decades. I began to wonder if it was safe for me to stay here. What if vagrants were hiding in the shadows waiting to jump me? Or kids were playing a prank? I'd stupidly left my keys in the engine, thinking I'd be right back, Anyone could drive off with my car and leave me stranded in the middle of nowhere. The thought made me shudder, and I quickened my pace, footfalls echoing around me as I walked towards the room with the light. The door was shut, but the same faint orange glow seeped out beneath the doorframe. "Hello? Pizza delivery?" I called through the door, rapping my knuckles against it. I thought, for a second, that I heard a shiver of movement on the other side of the door, and then silence again. Rolling my eyes, I tried the handle and pushed the door open, the light spreading across the hall. The smell hit me immediately, and I recoiled in disgust. The air was heavy with rot and decay. Pinching my nose with my hand, I looked inside the dimly lit room. My gaze skimmed past the dusty, soot-stained fireplace and rotten, moth-eaten curtains, and an old table lamp that filled the room with a low humming buzz. Someone was sitting in an armchair by the cold fire, waiting by an old-fashioned telephone. I could just make out the top of their head. Excuse me?" I called, trying not to breathe in the smell. What was that? "You ordered pizza?" When I received no response, I went around the armchair and peered at the person. The pizza fell right out of my hands, hitting the floor with a soft thud. I staggered back, covering my mouth with my hand as horror clenched my chest. Sitting in the armchair was little more than rotten flesh and bone, a body long decayed by time, gaunt and skeletal. It was clear they had been dead for a while. How long had it been since anyone had come out here? And who had given this address? I began to suspect that it had been a mistake when I saw a scrap of paper sitting by the telephone. Scribbled in faded ink was the number to the pizza place where I worked. It wasn't a mistake at all. Nausea bumped up my throat as I turned and fled the room, trying to get the gruesome visage of the decayed body out of my mind. Once outside, I got back into my car and called the police, then hightailed it out of there. This incident might not be much scary for you, but it was enough to spook me out and fill my nights with nightmares for months to come.
My friend made my Bumble profile. She insisted I put myself out there after a year of being single. I was in a 3-year-long relationship, and he cheated on me with someone from work, so I needed some time before I put myself back out there. My friend insisted on Bumble because, according to her, Tinder was all hookups and crap. In the beginning, I didn't have much luck. First, there was Tyler, who smelled. He took me to putt-putt, and I did not care for him to show me how to do it. He was very proud of his all-natural deodorant. Then there was Ryan, who only talked about his mom and still lived with her. After those duds, I wanted to give up completely. Being single isn't that bad, but then I came across Mike. He had short blonde hair and green eyes. His profile checked all the boxes for being an average, safe guy. He had pictures of him with different people, some solo shots of him in front of scenic backgrounds, and one with his mother. He didn't have a bio, and I never liked to just start with a hey. I always try to do a little more, so when there's no bio, I don't have much to work with. With Mike, though, that wasn't an issue. I hit him with that simple hey, and he really took initiative with the conversation. It was refreshing, because so often it's like pulling teeth to get these dating app guys to talk. From our first interaction, I was very excited to meet him in person. We went on a couple of dates before I let him take me back to his apartment. Looking back, it's so creepy how easily he deceived me. For our first date, he took me to a nice Italian restaurant. He called ahead to ensure we had a table overlooking the water. It was the most romantic date I had ever been on. My ex never did things like that for me. On our second date, he took me to the aquarium. You see, on the first date, I told him how much I loved aquatic animals, like sharks, clownfish, and manatees. For him, he told me it was a no-brainer. We had to go to the aquarium. I was so blown away at the thought he put into our dates. I felt like I really found something in him, but we didn't have much in common. He enjoyed hunting, and I'm a vegetarian. He liked to go to bars to drink with his buddies, and I preferred to stay in and read a book. Our differences only helped us have riveting conversations. He would send me sweet little texts throughout the week. One time, he sent me flowers. My ex never did those things. Mike treated me better than anyone else. I was careful because you hear so many horror stories about people you meet online. Mike respected that though. He knew I didn't want to rush into anything and put myself in a compromising position. He told me that's what he liked about me. At the time, I didn't quite know what to make of that. On our third date, he took me to his favorite steakhouse. It was the fanciest restaurant I had ever been in. I wore a little black dress and black heels, a classic look. He was dressed so nicely with a jacket and tie. It accentuated his strong arms. Usually, we would debate about animal rights or which Star Wars film was the best. But that night, the conversation took a different direction. He asked about my blood type and if I ever had a major surgery. I tried to laugh it off and asked him, "Why? Looking for a heart donor or something?" He smiled. He had such a charming smile. No, he laughed. "What if something happened to you? I want to be prepared." Mike ordered the largest steak on the menu. As he cut into it, he commented how nice it felt to cut into a slab of meat. I couldn't relate because I don't eat meat. He insisted I watch as he slowly cut into his T-bone steak. I think he kind of got off on it. I brushed these things off and still went home with him. Upon entering his home, those weird moments began to make more sense. Mike's walls were covered with taxidermy of every kind of animal. "You didn't tell me you were into taxidermy," I commented. Mike shrugged. "Women get weirded out by it, so I keep it to myself until they get to know me." "Oh, have you dated around a lot?" "About as much as the next guy. It's hard out here. You know that." I nodded, recalling when I listened to Ryan talk about his mom's relationship with her cat for 45 minutes. "Very true. Where's your restroom?" He pointed down the hall. His bathroom was meticulously clean. Every surface sparkled. Honestly, I needed to poop, so I spent a little time in there. I also needed to prepare for what was to come. As I reapplied some powder, I heard what sounded like a tarp being shaken out. I peeked my head out, and across the hall was his bedroom. The air reeked of alcohol. I walked across the hall expecting to see something sexy, but I found him in his room hanging up clear plastic tarps. "What are you doing?" He turned and smiled at me. "Just getting ready." "What? Do you have some major kink or something?" Mike walked up to me and touched my face. "Something like that." My skin crawled at his touch and I slowly backed away. "Why did you ask me about my blood type and if I ever had surgery?" "Because I don't mess with girls that are universal donors or have an AB blood type." "Why?" I tried to keep him talking until I had my bag and phone. "I just don't like, in theory, how much easier they are to save." I grabbed my phone. "You know, I think I should be going. I think there was something rotten in that salad and I'm just not feeling great." "You're not going anywhere." He charged towards me. There was a knife on the counter next to me, and I grabbed it and held it out. Just as I did this, he ran into the knife. I'd say I stabbed him, but it felt like luck that I moved quickly enough he couldn't react to me grabbing it. I called the police, and they were on the scene within 15 minutes. I gave them my statement. They found body parts of 13 different women stuffed into all his taxidermy. It took them months to assemble the bodies so their families could put them to rest. I didn't face charges because it was self-defense. I kept going over my time with Mike to see if I missed any warning signs, and I really can't think of any. I did everything right and still almost ended up stuffed into an elk's head. It was sheer luck that saved me. "I think we are being followed," Malcolm whispered, eyes straight ahead on the lonely road that led to his house, and I felt the air shove out of his mouth with such sputtering force that betrayed confusion. I could not tell how long since he had observed a stalker on that Halloween night. I had been oblivious of it, trapped in the laughter and gifts that we had shared. I was in love, and nothing else mattered in the world but the smell of my lover. Halloween night was just another liberating experience with Malcolm. The way he caressed me till I was burning with longing. He asked if we could take it home, and I replied positively without hesitation. Now, his tone was changed, and I noticed a slight shakiness in his respiration. I tried to turn my neck, and he nudged me with his shoulder. "Don't make it obvious that we know. I think he's been with us since the park." Malcolm said those words, and the smile on my face immediately dried up, turning into a sickening scowl of discomfort. My stomach tightened in knots, and the unease bolted up my chest. Malcolm's hands and mine wrapped tighter, and I felt my fingers being strangled by him. Malcolm had always made me feel safe, and I had never seen him panic. It was a terrible thing to be so vulnerable, I feared. "Who is following?" I asked quietly. "I'm not sure," Malcolm answered. He reasoned that it was some guy in a death costume and a scythe in his hand. It was dangerous to challenge such a person so late at night when we could simply escape them to the safety of his home where he could use his gun. I told him I was scared, and Malcolm turned my head over to his mouth. He planted a kiss on my cheek, and I used the opportunity to peek at the stalker. As sure as he had said, I saw the ghoulish figure, dressed in a long black cloak and a white mask, holding a scythe in his right hand, walking a few paces behind us in the open. The stalker noticed I was staring. He lifted his scythe, pointed the blade at me, and took the left into an alley, floating out of sight because his manner of motion was unnatural from how he moved. My blood froze in my veins in disbelief. Malcolm noticed my rasp. "What is it, Michelle?" My senses piqued interest, and I stood, rooted to the spot. I stared at Malcolm and then at the empty pathway behind us. He followed my gaze, and he sighed in relief. "I think he stopped following us." Malcolm blinked. "Is this some prank?" I quizzed, scared as could be. "Prank? Why would I want to do something like that?" My ears whirred. Halloween horror manifested itself in my imagination, and a dozen of such scary situations ran through my mind. Perhaps the most haunting thought was the fact that the scythe-wielding prankster had been so menacing in that small second that I stared at him and he lifted his scythe at me. I knew it was no ordinary prank and something sinister awaited. All of my senses pricked and I could take no more of it. "Walk me back to mine," I said to Malcolm at once. All my desire for intimacy had been replaced with a solid sense of dread that made my heart sweaty. Malcolm's tongue was heavy in his mouth, and his lower lip hung open as he regarded me. My mind was a dizzied pool where fear swam in liberty. He took a deep breath. He shrugged, stepped back, and pointed the way back from whence we had just come. "You know, you may be right," he whispered. "It may be a prankster on this Halloween night trying to get us worked up, and you're taking the bait." I maintained my silence as I began to walk with Malcolm behind me. My eyes never left the corner of the road which I had seen the prankster enter, and the closer I approached, the more heightened my apprehension was. I was no more than a few paces from where he had disappeared from our sight when he suddenly re-emerged in the glory of his black cloak, tattered around the edges and splotches of red on his white death mask. He pulled his scythe up, and I saw the blade catch the moon in a glint. It seemed bloodstained, but I was still in doubt. I stepped back in fright, but Malcolm, irritated by his ruined chances, stepped in front of me to approach the prankster. "Good prank for Halloween, homie. Can you scurry along now? You're making my girl uncomfortable," Malcolm warned. The death figure said nothing until Malcolm was close enough. Then, he struck. He whipped his scythe backwards and whipped the tip of the blade with all of the force that he could muster straight at Malcolm's head. Hell froze over, and reality played in a slow rhythm. I squealed in fright and flinched. Malcolm was far more reactive, and he only managed to get his hands up to block the blade from reaching his neck. The death figure's blade ate into Malcolm's palm and came out through the back of his hand. Malcolm let out a deathly screech of pain. The death figure moved over sharply to kick Malcolm down. Malcolm fell to his knees, and I watched in horror as he stomped in Malcolm's chest, lay him on his back on the hard ground. The death figure dragged his scythe out from Malcolm's palm and readied himself to land another strike.
I am Death, and I have come to collect all your souls,
he said in a guttural timbre, made even more cruel by the muffled effect of the mask he wore. I screamed when his scythe went up. He bent over and just about set himself to dig his blade into Malcolm's face while fear made me stiff. The gunshot echoed in the air, and another followed in quick succession. A poked hole appeared in the front of the mask, and it seeped with blood when the death figure stumbled forward, falling right beside Malcolm, who picked himself from the floor in a struggling bid to nurse his bleeding hand. Wretched piece of ass! A bloodied woman emerged from the path with a gun in her hand and moved over to the death figure on the floor. Stabbed me with that crazy thing and left me for dead. Didn't see him coming. She led another shot into his body, and then another. She turned her attention to Malcolm, who hung his hands in the air to stop the bleeding out from the wound. Halloween often brought out the crazies around the area, she said. The ambulance was on its way, as were the cops. Tie up that wound before you bleed out, she advised as she sat down to nurse her own injuries.